Hello, film nerds, and welcome back to Blockbuster Card. This is still a new show because it's still in its first year of existence from Osiris Media and Library Card Productions. And here we dive deep into the world of movies to discuss characters, cinematography, editing, and the role of the director to better understand the films we watch and the world around us. I'm Brian, and I'm joined here as always by Megan, someone who has never once turned down the offer of a Slurpee hot dog lifesaver apology from a stranger in an airport. Megan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. And I feel like with my mistake I made with my traveling plans last week, that I had a little bit of planes, trains, and automobiles vibe.
You did,
Because
and you just gave away the episode if someone just pressed play without looking at what we were talking about. Thank you. Yes, planes, trains, and automobiles today. And you have had your own travel snafu issues already here in this holiday season, not because of the government shutdown, but because of was it planning? Is it misreading dates? Tell us what happened.
well, when you try to be super on top of things and you book your plane tickets for Thanksgiving in August, you tend to not double check that Thanksgiving is a little bit later this year. It's a little bit later this year. Not
It
a
is.
lot, but it
Did you
is,
just
right?
assume the date of Thanksgiving?
Potentially. I
Potentially?
don't actually I just don't know what happened. I remember thinking, "I'm gonna do this really ahead of time this year. I am going to book these tickets, and wow, they're so inexpensive this year. That's
Yeah.
great." This is what you get when you book tickets really ahead of time, and I was so proud of myself. And then when I was getting into bed on Monday night last week and I got my "you should check in" email, that's when it all came crumbling down. But we still have tickets. We're still leaving tomorrow. We're still going to make our Thanksgiving dinner.
You're gonna make it, unless you run into the issues that are at the heart of the movie that we're gonna be discussing here today. But
Mhm.
no, it is interesting because Thanksgiving's one of those holidays because it's not on a set date. You kind of just are like, I feel like it's in the 20s. Like I have an idea of
Yeah.
where it's at this point in time. And if you don't really look close to it, it's not until like Halloween that I start thinking, okay, how far is Thanksgiving and how far is Christmas? How far do I have to start planning what I'm going to buy for my kids for Christmas? Or excuse me, talking to Santa about what Santa is
Wow,
going to
Brian.
make for the kids
Wow.
for Christmas. If we could get an intern in here to edit that out, it would be very helpful. So as Megan noted, our eighth episode of Blockbuster Card, we are going to be discussing the fifth film from the acclaimed 80s Midwestern director John Hughes, what I think of as the lone Thanksgiving film in the world, 1987's Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. This is a film which explores shifting cultural norms between white middle aged men in the era of Reagan, a film which displays the minor absurdities of American holiday travel, and a film which tugs at the heartstrings nearly more often than it makes us chuckle. It's a classic for a reason, and it's filled with layers of insight into the evolving American perspective. I watch this movie every year, at least twice around the holidays, once as an exploration of what the film means, and another as a passive and relaxed man on holiday moment. You, Megan, have just rewatched this for the first time in I believe a while, and so I'm very excited to discuss this with you. But before we do so, it's only proper in a podcast. We're going to need some preamble. I need to know what was the last great movie that you saw?
All right, I'm ready to tell you, but I will say I really enjoy this man on holiday vibe. I'm just picturing Brian Brinkman as man on holiday, and it's giving me a lot of joy. So
Can I give you the attire for Man on
I,
Holiday?
I really want to know. Yeah.
It's wool socks,
Love that.
sweatpants,
Hmm.
a fish T-shirt,
Of course.
but a collared shirt over the fish T-shirt because
Sort
we
of
still need to
presentable.
look presentable if someone comes to the door, friends come over to drop in and hang. If I have to jump on a Zoom call, there still has to be an air of presentable. Um, Usually an AirPod in one ear so that I can continue to absorb the jams that we are listening to for upcoming projects. A game potentially on television or
Mm.
this film on television, a book in hand so that if there's a commercial that comes up, I can kill another page or two. And
Hmm.
you my phone buzzing with, random, bouts of anger from young Ryan Storm, insights from you guys, and an assortment of other commentary from the other threads I'm a part of. So like that is just a breakdown of what, and the oven is a little warm with some nice smells emitting from it. This is the man on holiday.
Wow, yeah, that's a real clear image. Thanks for painting that for me. I like that when you're on holiday, you're still taking texts from Rhinestorm. That's really something.
You know, work never ends. Work
Never
never
ends.
ends.
All right. Well, speaking of work, I saw an amazing movie this weekend that I had never seen before. I saw Inglorious Bastards.
Oh my goodness, I forgot
I
about this.
know. The 2009 Tarantino film. I had never seen it, and I was trying to figure out why I'd never seen it, and I realized that my favorite thing about Tarantino movies are his characters and his dialogue. And I never saw Kill Bill because I felt like they were just action movies, which
Nope,
that might be totally wrong, I'm sure.
very
But
wrong.
that's wrong. Okay.
Very
I'd
wrong.
never seen them, and I was just kind of like, bored with that, not into it, like too much martial arts, whatever. And so I just kind of stopped and I missed this one, which is very strange. But I absolutely loved it. The characters, the dialogue, it's that perfect mix of really exaggerated performances with really nuanced emotional performances too. I love when a movie can do that, can provide you like huge larger than life characters and then also really emotionally honest and earnest performances. And I feel like that movie does this so well. It's also funny, it's thrilling, it's got beautiful people in it. The colors are unbelievable. It has some of the most incredible shots. Revisionist history in movies, I love them. Do you like them?
Yeah, I do.
They're
I think
fun,
that
right?
I think when handled properly and within the hands of a storyteller like Tarantino, you're going to get
Yeah.
a great revisionist history. And I think it was a great subject that kind of bled together. Um, his obsession with martial arts films, his obsession with 70s black exploitation, but also this like very well-known historical period that had been handled with so much care by
Yeah.
directors like like Steven Spielberg when he focuses on World War II. There's a real honor, there's real valor that's a part of what he's doing. It's a real regal representation of what happened during that period in time. And when you have that Tarantino, um, you know,
Playfulness.
that playfulness and that like punk nature to him addressing World War II in this sort of way, there's a fun element to it, there's a shock value element to it that gets to the core. I mean, so much of his storytelling gets to the core of really human experiences through just absurdity
Yeah.
and true fun, and that movie does that entirely. I haven't seen it in some time. I need to rewatch it. I've fallen way behind on our full rewatch of the big pictures top 25 movies of the century so far, because I really have just massive disagreements with the way that they've handled this overall list. And when they put
Me
Inside
too.
Llewyn Davis on over
Mm-mm.
No Country for Old Men, it really just kind of threw me for a loop. And I said, okay, I'm going to pause this for a bit, maybe around the holidays. And I've gotten into a really good clip with movie watching now. I had my biggest week of the year in consuming movies since April.
Wow.
Last
This
week,
last week?
like, so I'm back on
Mm.
pace right now where I wanna be, so I think I can get back to this list, which will mean I will well, actually, also, I'm realizing now, Glorious Bastards leaves Netflix at the end of the month, so I'm gonna have to watch it.
You have to watch it. Well, I'm only 3 behind now. I've 2 or 3, and I've mostly caught up, and I've been ranking them on my own. So I'm excited to share that with you when I finish. But yeah, I think this movie just that last part when you know who gets killed, I won't give the spoiler. It's just the smile on my face. It was so fun and I love the movie. So it was a great watch and I'm glad I did. I think I'll probably do all of Tarantino's next year. We'll see. I like to have one project like that every year.
Yeah, it's definitely a good watch, and it's not too many movies. I think he only has 9, maybe 10 out at this point, so, you're not really gonna be you're not gonna be living in that world for too long. I read his book last year or earlier this year, Cinema Speculation, which goes through, I think, 12 movies that really formed the core of who he was. And that was great insight. I watched a bunch of great movies as a result of that. Um, I have been on a 2025 kick. A lot
Mhm.
of
Ooh, that's
2025
fun.
movies. are showing up on streaming, so I'm catching up in a lot of cases. Um, but we have a few that are still being released in theaters. And last week, I took a little hooky afternoon, walked down to the local cinema, and watched Begonia, the new
Mm. Yorgos movie.
Yorgos movie. I was completely blanking on his name. Starring Emma Stone, Jesse Plemons. I don't think there's anyone else notable. Oh, Alicia Silverstone is in the movie, though I didn't realize it until afterwards.
Really? She looks
Yeah,
different.
I want to toe the line on what I say here on the podcast because I made a huge faux pas over the weekend, and I was texting with a thread of movie buddies, and I said a little too much about what is revealed in the end of this movie, and completely spoiled it for a friend, which I haven't done.
No!
I've not done that in a long time, and I feel really bad about it. So, what I will just say is, I think that this movie is, along with a really interesting trilogy and a really interesting movement we're starting to see emerge in film, of really accurately but personally covering very, very current moments in politics and in global affairs and society. I'd put this along with Eddington and One Battle After Another this year, in terms of movies that really just nail the tone and the vibe of the time we're currently living with, in a way that, and I heard this compared, so this is not immediately my thought, but I agree entirely with it. Similar to the way that the Pakula trilogies, or trilogy in the 70s of Clute,
Mm.
Parallax View, and All the President's Men, really highlighted the paranoia and distrust of government around Watergate and what was happening towards the end of the 60s and early 70s, where the economy was at that point in time, where politics were. These three movies really have done the same thing this year for me in a really fascinating way. And this one, the more I think about it, the more I think, after the big reveal happens at the end, of what exactly was going on throughout the movie, there's so much to chew on and so much I keep thinking about. So I will definitely be rewatching this. I highly recommend it. It will end up as one of my favorite movies of 2025. So can't recommend it enough. Begonia by Yorgos
Wow.
Lanthimos. Please go and see it in theaters, just so that these types of movies can continue to be supported and represented, and continue to be made. Because even with whatever flaws there may be, like, a movie like this should be shown to mass audiences, and I can't recommend it enough.
Yorgos is so risky, and I love that as a filmmaker. I'm excited to see it. I really like this idea of him and Aster and PTA taking on the moment. I think it's so brave and rare, I think, for directors nowadays to do it, and it's a hard time to make a movie about. So I think it's really cool that people are doing it, and I can't wait to see it. It looks really weird.
Yeah, and a lot of these, like, well, PTA, like, never really made a contemporary movie until this,
Yeah.
and part of the challenge was always, what do you say about this moment? And you don't want to come across as too immediately accurate, because then that puts you in a position of, what do you get wrong long term? What looks cringy 5 years later? What doesn't hold up as accuracy? And I think a lot of I mean, obviously we haven't had a ton of time from these movies, so maybe things will change dramatically, but right now they feel immediately a part of this moment and where we're at, and I can't recommend it enough.
All right, I'm gonna go see it. Sold.
I watched another one this week that called After the Hunt, that I was telling you about, that I think attempts to do this,
Mm.
and fails pretty miserably in a lot of cases. Although I really enjoyed my experience watching it. If you want to watch a movie that looks like a New Yorker magazine smells, like that feel when you get a New Yorker magazine, and like the cover just looks pretentious in the best way, and the font looks pretentious in the best way, and the cartoons, like, if you get the jokes, you're like, I'm in like the 1% of education and intellect here in America. That is what this movie feels like. And then falls on its face in a pretty dramatic way. But there's clearly an attempt to make a movie of the moment right now, and I'm here for it.
Yeah, it's entertaining, I've heard too. If for nothing else, for the reasons you mentioned.
I was very entertained, and I think you would be too. But we're gonna step back here and talk about another movie of the moment, if you will, and that is Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. This is a 1987 American road trip comedy. This is written, produced, and directed by John Hughes, and it stars Steve Martin as Neil Page and John Candy as Del Griffith. It tells the story of Neil, an uptight marketing executive, and Dell, a well meaning but annoying salesman who become travel companions when their flight is diverted and embark on a 3-day odyssey of misadventures trying to reach Chicago in time for Neil's Thanksgiving dinner with his family. Um, this is a movie I can't tell you how many times I've seen this. It feels endless at this point in time. I could just kind of close my eyes and see the entire movie unveil itself. Meg, I feel like you hadn't seen this movie in some time. Tell me your relationship to this movie and what your thoughts were watching this over the weekend.
Well, I grew up in the 80s in Michigan. So for me, I lived about an hour from where Hughes was born. And then he moved to suburban Chicago, which is where you are from. So you and I are kind of the perfect people to talk about John Hughes movies. But it's really difficult for me to describe how impactful Hughes was as a filmmaker for me growing up. I not only really identified with the settings of his movies, but they were so definitive about what it felt like to be a kid and a teenager in America in the 80s. I saw Mr. Mom when I was really, really young. And in sixth grade, I became completely obsessed with Ferris Bueller. I remember sitting in front of the VCR with my best friend, like playing and recording and rewinding, and memorizing every scene. Like I can still say the Sloane speech. The Simone speech when she talks about Ferris being absent. It's just that movie. I used to have Save Ferris written on my binders. It was just so huge to me. I wanted to be Sloane. I wanted to have a boyfriend like Ferris. That was to me what high school was going to be like in a way. And I think the great outdoors and movies like Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, these were movies that I watched countless times when I was a kid. I had two siblings, a younger sister and a brother, and we could never agree on what we wanted to rent from the movie store. So the things we always agreed on were comedies. So we were renting Steve Martin comedies like Three Amigos, The Jerk. We were watching like Roseanne. We were watching all of his movies, whether they were comedies or not. But then we were watching so many John Candy comedies. And we were watching Police Academy and all of these 80s movies that were just, I kind of feel like my humor was developed by these guys in a way. And it was so fun to kind of grow up with John Hughes movies because then as a teenager, you got to watch all the Molly Ringwald teenager movies. And I've seen all of those movies a million times. And then I think about Home Alone and Christmas Vacation. Christmas Vacation, my family watches it every year on Christmas Eve. We have for as long as I can remember. These are just movies that were totally defined what I want from movies. And when I think now about my favorite movies, they have massive hearts. And I think that's what John Hughes movies do. He was able to make comedies that also have humongous emotional centers. And I think that's what was so fun was going back to this movie. I don't think I've watched this movie since I was a teenager. And going back to it, it was so different watching it as an adult. I think
How so?
when you watch these movies as a kid, you're watching them for kind of the slapstick humor. You're watching Steve Martin roll down an overpass or like John Candy smoking a cigarette, vibrating in a bed, and you're laughing, right? Or you're watching like Ferris create this elaborate ruse so it looks like he's sleeping in his bed. And you're not really seeing the larger themes underneath it a lot of the time about family and about living for the moment and about not assuming people are who they think you are or, relating to people being something that's like important. Like, I think that's a huge part of this movie that like relating to people and being authentic is more important than like getting what you need out of life. And I think that watching it as an adult, you just watch them on a totally different level. And I
Mhm,
think there are
mhm.
very few movies or filmmakers that can make movies that can be seen on many different levels. Like, I was even thinking about that Inglorious Bastards, for instance. It's not really a movie that you could watch totally differently as a child and as an adult. Like,
Mm,
you might
mm.
pull some things that are different from it, but it is still essentially the same movie, whereas you watch a Hughes movie, it has layers because there's adults doing things that kids don't really understand, and I don't know, it just I found that so fascinating, and when I think about all these movies and this happened to me a lot when I've showed John Hughes movies to my kids because I've showed them a lot of them, and it's so interesting to watch their reaction to these movies and see them as an adult, and I think that that's my favorite thing about this experience was just getting to see it through the eyes of an adult because I haven't watched it in a long time.
Yeah, I've been having that experience of late. My son is currently in the middle of the Harry Potter book series, which I read when I was a kid, and seeing his reaction as he uncovers certain elements of the series and seeing how quickly he's become just totally taken by it
Yeah,
has
that's the
has
best.
yeah, because um that series can help unlock a lot of reading and a lot of interest in how do books become movies and what gets taken away and what all that sort of stuff, like seeing it from an adult's perspective while your kid goes through it, you get to both remember what you found fascinating here, but also you just see it from a different perspective. I've been also going through a lot of, and I track whatever movies I watch with him on Letterbox, just so like I know what we're introducing him to, what we're going back to, what we may have missed out on. And we just rewatched E.T. with him a couple weeks ago, and I hadn't seen that movie in probably 20 years, and I had, like, very vivid memories of the way it made me feel as a kid, and it was both similar, but also, like, a lot of new revelations that were coming out as I was watching it as an adult with kids, knowing, like, "Okay, if this happened in our neighborhood, like, how would we react to something like" and, like, what would be
Yeah.
the but also, understanding from a parent standpoint, because such a central figure in that movie is the mom who's she's currently going through a separation from her husband. She's experiencing this transformational experience with her kids and what she's going through, like that sort of sadness I couldn't really reach as a kid, you could suddenly
Yeah.
see as an adult in a really impactful way. And so you realize how many layers are in these movies. This movie has been very much like that for me in the sense that I was introduced to this movie as a kid. I was born in '85, so I probably didn't see it until the early '90s, particularly because of the one scene where Steve Martin says fuck at least like 7 or 8 times. I think my parents were like, we'll just hold off on that for a bit. But there was definitely a period in like the early '90s where my dad would start introducing me to movies that were a little bit past what was probably appropriate, usually coinciding with my mom going away for a week or 2 to watch tennis with her mom. Um, and so I'd see, a lot of big action movies and a lot of comedies that had an R rating. And I remember watching this and like the thing that always attracted me to this movie, you talk about the heart. At the center of this movie is this desire to get home for family for a nostalgic experience, but also, these lost the realization that the American dream that we've been sold, you can start to see in this movie where it's fading, where
Mhm.
um, the urban elites and now suburban elites like Neil Page, who have this idea of what needs to happen so that he can continue to go forward in his life towards whatever financial professional goals he has. Thanksgiving is like equally this pause and reflection, but also just like a beat in the journey. Like the goal is that he leaves as close as he can to the flight to get back home, gets to experience the holiday with family, and probably a week later he's back in New York trying to work, from a professional standpoint. Whereas Del Griffith has these aspirations and these ideas and these hopes about what his life should have been and could have been, and is
Mm.
essentially living a fantasy throughout the movie, um, around what it is. when the reality is he's lost so much of what kind of ties us together from a cultural standpoint around the holidays. And so that kind of sadness plus, you see in the lighting, in the music, this sense of forlorn for what's not there, and this sadness of being away from home and experiencing holidays away from family. There's a lot of layers in this that, like you said, you see it as a kid looking for the slapstick elements, but as you age, and especially as you experience holidays away from home or traditions start to change, you get to this place where the core of this movie is about like chasing some ephemeral uh um memory that you never really can fully reclaim. But I feel like I feel that every time we get around the holidays that there's like an idea of what I want to experience, what I want to feel again, and you're never fully going to feel that because it's in the past and it's not something you can touch.
Yeah, there's something like that. My daughter, my younger daughter, she always on her birthday when she was younger, she doesn't do this anymore, but when she was really young, at the end of the day on her birthday, she would always cry in her bed when she was going to bed. And I would always say, like, "What's wrong? What's wrong? We had such a great day." And she'd like, "My birthday's over and it's not going to happen for another year." And I feel like that way around the holidays, that there's such a buildup to it. Holidays are so huge in my family, huge. We have like these massive overblown Christmas with all these traditions and things we do, and we have to do them or everybody's sad. And you can see that they kind of talk about that. And it is funny because we think so much about America as like sort of traditionless or cultureless in so many ways, but you really see the American cultural tradition of Thanksgiving, with like the holiday recitals that he's going to miss that his daughter's doing. And he knows that he has this like montage of seeing all their faces and imagining what the holiday meal is going to be like. And you see that there are so many small pieces to these days that mean so much to us. And yeah, I think as a kid you don't see that in the movie as much, but the movie is really sad if you think about it. I mean, I think that's what is so amazing. My favorite scene of this movie is when they're in the motel room, and they have their confrontation. And Steve Martin says all those like really mean things to Dal. And you agree because he's super annoying. But then the
Yeah, I
way that
couldn't travel with Dell.
no
Just couldn't
way,
do
Del, I just could not. No, I could not. Like,
it.
it gives me so much anxiety. Like, my hotel rooms are like immaculate. So, like, that was really driving me nuts. But seeing like Dell's reaction, because Candy's such an incredible actor, that moment is so sad and so genuine. And I think that Hughes is so good at that in a way I think that not a lot of actors, or excuse me, filmmakers can set up a scene to have it be absolutely hilarious, have a big kind of conflict and cathartic moment, and then have it be really sad. That is just absolutely incredible deftness in what is essentially a comedy. I think that his movies are really kind of all comedies that have these underlayers that are really thoughtful. It's incredible.
Yeah, and you think about it in like Ferris Bueller with the character of Cameron, who um I remember the first time I watched it, I was so confused why someone like Ferris is hanging out with someone like Cameron. And then you watch it again and again, and you kind of realize, because like Ferris really sells himself as the most popular kid in school, and Cameron I think seems like someone who can't get out of his own skin and like can't figure out a way forward in the world. And there's a great scene towards the end where they're talking about the next year and where they're going to go and what they're going to do. And you
When they're
realize
in
the
the hot tub,
sadness
they're in the
when they're
they're
in the
in the
hot tub, yeah.
the
And you
best.
realize the sadness in for Ferris that like a lot of this control of having these people around him who he really cares about, who cares about him, um, all of that is essentially going to go away, and he's gonna have to rebuild, in the next year. And you think about where Cameron is gonna go at that point in time. So like there is this sense, and he does it so perfectly with Candy, who can give you a look that like that scene you're describing in the hotel room. I can watch that and like feel everything melt inside of me because it is so intimate and it's so honest and it's perfectly delivered, and the music behind it is just incredible, and like it's drenched in synthesizers in a way that's like designed to just make you sad. But at the same time, he can give a look and his face can do like one little twitch and you're just laughing. And he
Yeah.
has this ability to like sway between um, what ultimately brings you just immediate joy and also what can really crush your soul.
One of the best actors of his generation. He was in so many movies. It's wild. And carried so many movies and had that energy of just someone who's so funny, but who has such a big heart. And that's just special.
Um, let's talk a little bit about kind of big picture. This movie is set in 1987. It was filmed in February 1987. It came out the day before Thanksgiving 1987. Um, in a lot of ways, this movie looks like our world today. But the further we get from the 80s, this is now almost 40 years old. The further we get
Wow.
from the 80s, the I think further we realize how much has changed. And if you think about 1987, 40 years prior was just post World War II. Like this is a big gap of time that's happened. But a lot of the economic realities of our time were set up in the 1980s. A lot of the cultural realities and norms, a lot of the political realities and realignments happened in the 1980s in a way that we're still fighting a lot of these battles today. What do you see through this movie as similarities between 80s America and today?
I was thinking a lot about that. And I think that there's such a rise of conservatism that really reminds me of the 80s. The kind of global instability of economic trade, advances in technology. You think about like the internet, video games, personal computers, like all of that came in the 80s. And I think of how much of technology is changing now and how fast. And the other thing that really sticks out to me about the 80s compared to now is that teen culture is like really important and prevalent. You think about something like TikTok, and I think so many of the movies in the 80s were about what it's like to be a teenager and how important that was to the kind of cultural zeitgeist then. And I think it's really interesting that those things are similar now. And it's almost like we've kind of gone back. We've kind of made the full loop through progressivism back to where we were in the 80s in so many ways.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting point because yeah, there's definitely a theme across Hughes movies that teenagers and adults don't speak the same language.
Mhm.
And I think when you're a teenager, you feel that most acutely. And then I think you lose that kinda cultural divide as you get a little older into your 20s that, because in some ways you still feel like you feel like you're crossing over into adulthood, so you're making choices you would have probably not made when you were a teenager, um, making rationalizations you probably would not have made, but at the same time, certain core beliefs that you felt as a teenager may be hardening, and it may be something that is really guiding where your life is going. But I definitely feel I just turned 40 this year, and the sense of like the separation between where I'm at right now and where teenagers are today. And I work with a lot of college students, like undergraduate students who are just at the edge of that, and the realization that we're just not consuming the same media, we're not consuming the
Mm-mm.
same cultural artifacts. Um, certain trends that are big for them will bleed upwards and will become a part of the cultural zeitgeist. But then by then, teenagers want nothing to do with it, and you definitely get that in this movie. This sense of like, um, there is a culture of middle class white guys who are existing and are trying to make their way in the world, and then there's everyone else. And it's funny that like Del Griffith breaks through to a lot of teenagers when he sells shower curtain rings
Yeah.
as earrings, because there's like a sense of someone who is that open to human connection can connect with anyone, whereas someone like Neil
Yes.
Page can't really connect with anyone when they're on the road. Um, but like you were talking about from a larger, like, conservative view, there's something about this movie that feels like it is tapping into what, makes something like It's a Wonderful Life so, celebrated throughout the years as a holiday movie, in that there's a chase towards what was once possible. What once made this country special, what has been lost, what are we doing to lose the plot? Um, and while this movie doesn't really touch in any sort of way on like civil rights or race relations and how it compares to these guys' experiences, um, there definitely is like a sense that the country is changing, that it's getting away from these guys, that someone like Neil Page, who has worked his whole career to be in this position of somewhat, moderate authority, should not be having to grovel for a trip back home to see his family. Whereas someone like John Candy's character, Del Griffith, is, as he mentions, he's just like a twig on the shoulders of a mighty stream. Just he's along for the ride. He knows that whatever happens, if you're nice to people, good things will come to you, even if there's trouble along the way. And that sort of like debate between should we be okay with
Mm.
things changing and evolving versus should we try to cap where things have changed and evolved because we already have good special things here that we need to preserve. That's a lot of the debates we're still having today.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I was thinking about how Dell is like this down to earth. He's portrayed as less sophisticated, and he's really rewarded for that in this film. Where
Yeah.
Neil struggles, and Neil represents the white collar suburban dad of two, lives in a perfect house, works at a marketing firm, like it's like the future, like in the 80s, like the marketing firm. And he kind of becomes more and more isolated and unable to like get what he needs because he gets so frustrated. And when you talked about that scene at the rental car place, which is like one of my favorite scenes, the way that Steve Martin is moving his mouth in that scene is like unbelievable. How they like close up on his face and his teeth are just like, it's so good. And how he swears like that, which is so unexpected from Steve Martin. And also, he's kind of like America's dad in some ways. And
Yeah.
so like it's very just like, what?
Which
And I
gives it
love
more power when he freaks out like that, because there does
exactly.
feel like there's a sense that he's justified that, like, haven't I done enough to just get a rental car that I can just drive home? And
Exactly.
instead, he has to deal with the normal travel complications that pretty much everyone has had to deal with at some point in their lives. He's just not handling it well.
Yeah, although I have to say if I got to the car rental place and my car was gone like that, I'd be really fucking mad too.
I would lose it.
It's super fair of him. But yeah, there's even the way that they're dressed, like he's in that suit with the fedora. And then when the fedora gets crushed by the car when he falls down the overpass, and Candy's in, this like hunting cap and this much more kind of everyman clothes and pulling this trunk. And there's just something, it's also a buddy movie of two unlikely buddies. And in that way, it's so satisfying because some of the best movies are when two people who shouldn't be together end up being together for whatever reason, and that's kind of when the comedy or the conflict or the interest ensues. But
Yeah. Yeah, that relationship between the two of them where they should not be traveling together. I mean, that this is a very well-worn approach in Hollywood
yeah.
cinema, and it seems to work when it's delivered with this sort of authenticity. We talked about the heart of this movie and about like kind of the sadness at the core of it. One thing that really hits me is the overall music in this film, which sounds very, very 80s and actually drew a really negative critique by Leonard Maltin, who said that the film was hurt by an awful music score, which I don't personally understand. Maybe you feel differently from what I do. This to me is one of those examples of the further you get from the 1980s, the more you realize that the music of the era was really transcendent, really forward thinking. And now, as music has kind of, since the mid 2010s, looked back on the 80s with, as a younger generation discovered synthesizers and gated drums and that really just atmospheric production, and has tried to, has scattered that across a lot of popular music over the last 10, 15 years. I think that there has been an appreciation for it. But for me, like when I hear this, when I hear various moments in the overall score, especially those really haunting synthesizers that come in, it's an additional element of sadness and nostalgia and this kind of desire for something to work out, but also for the trip to continue because clearly there are
Mm.
that means a lot to them, from a broad scale standpoint. What were your thoughts about the music in this film, and how did it add to the overall way you were feeling as you were watching it?
I think some of the music is fairly jarring. I do think that's fair to say. I think there's a part in the motel scene that the music comes in and it's like, what's happening? Like it's very there's no subtlety to it sometimes. And I
No.
think that's really it's harsh sometimes. Sometimes it bothered me. But I do totally agree with synths in movies, and I totally agree with parts of the music adding an element of kind of like adding emotion to it in a way that I think works. But there is, I mean, when Candy's singing in the car is like one of my favorite moments in the movie. And just reminding me about what radio was in the 80s and that you could kind of find whatever you wanted to listen to.
Mhm.
And everybody was listening to the same 5 stations. And so you could listen to like your oldies and get like, your R&B. You could listen to the classic rock station. You could listen to the 80s station. And that was pretty much it. You could listen to like the sports game. And I think there was something so collective about that I miss, that I really, really miss, and I think that was a huge part of my childhood, and I love any car scene from the '80s where people are singing to the radio is very nostalgic for me, and I love it. But yeah, I agree. I think I tend to be a little bit more I wasn't totally sold on the music in this film, but I will say
Mm.
I don't know if this is true for you, but I tend to see less of the mechanics of the cinematography and the score in a Hughes film. Like I'm so maybe because the world is so close to me and I know it so well, I tend to just feel like I'm in it and I feel like I'm watching for like the humor or the emotion or the story and I kind of forget that I'm watching a movie. And I'm not looking so much at, like, I don't know, like, when I watch Inglorious Bastards, I'm like, "Wow, look at that shot. Look at the way that he's using color here." Look or I watch PTA movie and I'm like, "Look at the light." Like and with Hughes films, I'm not. I'm just kind of like, "Yeah, that's the side of the road in, like, St. Louis." Like, I just believe it in a way that's different. I don't know if that happens to you, if it's just me, but
Yeah, I mean, I totally get it, and I think, like, growing up, especially in the Midwest, there is a sense of that's the normalcy I grew up with. There's
yeah.
um a motel on the side of a highway in the Midwest with, gray snow on the side of the road, uh, where you have this, like, mix of people that live in the various size cities within the region, but also, like, a very urban, rural, congregation. Just once you leave the city, you're just in rural America and, like, having to, you know, uh understand like different cultural norms. Like that's something that he does so well. And I personally think because I'm thinking of like the music from Ferris Bueller as well. The dated nature of of the music, the jarring nature of some of this music, kind of adds to that Hughesian element to it.
Mm.
That you feel as though you are in the mid 1980s. Like there's no he's not trying to make a '70s film. He's not trying to do
Right.
anything other than just say, "This is people at this point in time living their lives, and these are the highs and lows." Um, I do think the more I watch movies and the more I revisit Hughes classics, I see a little bit more of kind of the mechanics of what he's trying to do here. And a movie like this, which is so tight, it is really easy
Yeah.
just to like press play and then you're through it. There are a number of kind of subplots that were taken out of this movie as
Mhm.
a result of timing. This movie originally they used a ton of improvisation between Candy and Steve Martin. The original cut was 3 hours and 45 minutes long. There was a big subplot about Neil's wife not believing that he was on the road with Dell and he was actually with another woman. The guy who breaks in and steals from them was actually a pizza delivery driver from earlier who dropped the beer in the hallway, which created the mess when John Candy opened it on the bed. Um, they ended up driving. They took a wrong turn to Wisconsin in the original filming, and so like that's why the movie they have to spend a night in between St. Louis and Chicago, which is a
Yeah.
5 hour drive. They could have just
Doesn't
gotten
make
home the night
sense.
before. But like so when you start to think about like the additional subplots and the amount of freedom that he gave Candy and Martin to make this movie, um, like you're not going to get the type of camera work that you would get in a PTA or a like a Yorgos movie where like you get the camera is a character here.
Yeah,
And I think that
exactly.
that is part of what makes Hughes so kind of singular, is that he's telling a story that if you grew up within this region of the country, you've seen what this
Yeah.
story feels like in a lot of ways. Um, but I feel also like your eye is almost seeing it from the way that he is filming it. Like he's not revealing something brand new. He's kind of reaffirming the way that you feel about this part of the world and the life you grew up in.
Yeah, he's kind of the everyman of filmmakers, and I say that as a massive compliment because I don't know if there's a filmmaker who has this many hits in a row that was so definitive for a generation. I mean, he was the filmmaker of the '80s. Like, I would challenge you to find anybody that was making films about the moment like he was, and it's interesting because we were just talking about that, about filmmakers making movies about the present, and it's really hard to do, I think. It seems like what he's doing is sort of simple, but he's really capturing the '80s in a way that I don't know if there's any other decade that's been like captured like that on film in the heartland of America. I don't know. It's just very singular what he did. I think he's a complete genius, but he is less showy.
Yeah, I mean, there's an argument to be made that by almost documenting the banal existence within this part of the world, but highlighting the absurdities and the love at the heart of this part of the world
Yeah.
is its own filmmaking. I will say, like, one of my favorite things about this movie is the way that many of the internal scenes are lit, be it the car
Mm.
that they're driving through after they land in Wichita, where they're, you know, uh, the only thing to see on the interstate is interstate. Your friend said he'd never been around here anymore or before, so I figured I'd show him around. That whole scene, the lighting within each of the motels, like a lot of that looks like it just has not been updated in 40 years. And it has that feel that like you check into a roadside motel anywhere in Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota, Michigan, Wisconsin, that whole area. It feels like those motels do, especially the last one with kind of the just really nice neon lights and the internal lighting there. I tend to like that a lot, and that maybe I've just seen this so many times that like that's what I'm focusing on, but that really always hits me. I'm curious though, like this movie is about traveling back home for Thanksgiving. It's about this yearning to be with family. It's about this nostalgia. Have you ever missed or had to be away from your family for any sort of holidays or Thanksgivings? Like, do you have memories of that?
Yeah, we lived in London for 3 years, and so we never went home for Thanksgiving and for those 3 years, and it was awesome. We just did, like, Friendsgiving with expat families, and it was awesome. Like, it was so fun because everybody someone in everybody's family of all these friends was a really good cook, so we'd have, like, amazing food. Everybody would bring incredible food, and we would kind of jokingly talk to our kids about, like, what Thanksgiving was because my daughters were really young when they were there. They were, um 1 and 3, and we lived there for 3 years, and so this was their first memories of Thanksgiving, and it wasn't at home, it wasn't in America, and it was so funny. I remember trying to get a turkey to cook, in London, and when I bought one from a really nice butcher shop, I had to pluck. It had, like, a lot of, like, feathers still in it, and it was just a whole different thing. It was so fun, but it was really interesting to be away, to not have to be in kind of like what is Thanksgiving, which is usually for me extended family, football on the TV, the women in the kitchen cooking, very like Americana, watching the parade in the morning. And it was interesting to be removed from that and still kind of create your own version of the holiday. But it
Yeah.
definitely just felt like more of a party, lots of booze, lots of fun. Totally different experience. How about you? Were you
Yeah.
ever away?
Yeah. I mean, I've spent a lot of holidays away living overseas as well. The one that I always think back on in 2007, I was um, studying abroad and I was working on a project in Antwerp, Belgium, and I had a there's a big Muslim and Jewish population there, so I was studying um, from like a social science standpoint what both neighborhoods were like and where their conflicts were, where their challenges were, and how this kind of related to broader issues in the Middle East. And I had an interview that day with a local rabbi, and we met, and he immediately said, "Oh, it's a huge holiday back where you come from. Like, do you have any plans for dinner?" And I was like, "No, I was just gonna like, go home and eat whatever." And I was definitely like feeling down that day. And he took me out to get food and bought me a really nice little like chicken dinner with uh matzo ball soup, and it was amazing. And it would like it felt like this sense of the holiday was suddenly bigger than family. It was something that was recognized on like a human level. And like
Yeah, I
that
love
like
that.
really, really impacted me. Yeah, I mean, one thing I found, like, how Thanksgiving for me was always defined by going to my Uncle Bobby's house, and he lived in this really amazing, like, big cabin, in Barrington, Illinois, and we would always play music, we'd stay up way too late, and I remember 30 years ago, this Thanksgiving was when the Beatles, anthology series debuted, and so we would we hung out. We had all of our family in town. I've got a huge family on that side, my dad's side of the family, and everyone was in town for this. And we would hang out Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and we would turn on the Beatles anthology when that came on. And it was 10 years old. It was this like huge rediscovery of, I'd listened to the Beatles a lot as a kid, but it was, learning so much about the band, learning the band's history was a huge, huge moment for me. So like those types of memories I always think about when I think of Thanksgiving, and being away from that suddenly put me in a position of like, okay, what does this mean outside of just family? What does this mean for like from a societal level, like community level? And as I've gotten older, like, most of our Thanksgivings tend to be with extended friends and family. And there's a sense of, you know, remembering both the ones where it really felt like the holiday for me and the ones where I had to like kind of recreate it.
Yeah, there's such an interesting thing about holidays about kind of how much of it is the pageantry and how much of it is the feeling, right? And you're kind of always balancing that line. Growing up, my father's family moved to North Carolina, and so we would drive from Michigan to North Carolina every Thanksgiving. So we would do like this road trip every year. It was like a 12-hour road trip, and it was always comical because my family's funny, but we would like try to sedate our dog, and she would put like her nose in the air conditioner and stand up at attention for the entire like 12 hours because the sedation pills didn't work, and we'd be arguing over the radio. We used to listen to Good Morning Vietnam, the soundtrack. And we were driving back from Boston last night with my kids. We went to see my in-laws for like an early Thanksgiving, so we wouldn't see them this year. And I played that soundtrack for them. And it was so amazing. I don't know if you've ever heard it, but teaching that to the kids, because Robin Williams does all this. He's playing, have you ever seen that movie?
Hmm.
Yeah, so he's the DJ. And so they have a lot of his improvisations on the soundtrack. And they were just jokes that my family thought was so funny growing up, and so we'd listen to that, and then my sister and I would sing show tunes, and we would do this huge drive, and then we'd get down, and it'd be, like, warm weather, and my grandparents lived on a farm, and so we'd be outside, like, with the animals, and it was just being in a totally different environment from, like, where I grew up,
Yeah.
and seeing my grandfather call the cows in and joke about how he was gonna, like, cut off a turkey's head in front of me, and it was a very world shifting experience for me every year when we did that. And I always think that I kind of miss that my kids don't go on these like big ill-fated road trips where like you have to deal with, which is kind of what this movie obviously is. And I think there's something I love road trips. There's something so American about road trips. I'm sure they happen all over the world, but there's something very American about road trips to me. And I miss that I don't do that with my kids more often every Thanksgiving. I think it'd be really fun to do.
Yeah, it's something like the way that Christmas Vacation
Yeah.
showcases family coming to town and you having to set up your home and convert
Yeah.
your home into a hotel for 5 6 days, and you kind of lose your mind, and then you bought all this stuff and it's opened, and then it's December 27th and everyone's gone, and you're just like back to, the holidays are almost over at this point in time. This movie, by contrast, really showcases the what a road trip home means for the holidays, and what like trying to battle the road as you're trying to get home, and this journey that feels more like Thanksgiving to me than Christmas. Maybe people have them reversed. I
Hmm.
remember 2005, I was flying home from college, and there was some pretty significant inversion hitting the valley in Missoula, and so planes couldn't take off or land at the airport. So our flight had been diverted from Missoula to Bozeman, and it was like an 11 a.m. flight. So we got up super early in Missoula, a bunch of us, and we drove to drop my brother and I off at the airport. We drove through the night to Bozeman, stopped in Butte to get some breakfast, got to Bozeman. It was so cold, but it was at least clear, and it's not a narrow valley, so the inversion doesn't really affect it. We flew from Bozeman back to Chicago, and I just remember that experience so much when I think back on like Thanksgiving, this like journey through the elements to get back
Yeah.
home to see family. Yeah, and I think ultimately what this movie really signifies to me is that sense that like these traditions are really important and really impactful, but also that question that I think you think about as you get older, and as you grow, and as you have your own kids, and as you see what it takes to put these holidays on, is kind of what do they actually mean versus
Hmm.
what do we want them to mean.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think what traditions will your children remember and want to carry on for themselves? And it's fun, especially as my kids get older, to see kind of what they hold on to. And I think about my daughters, they still like want their grandparents to read them the night before Christmas. And and they're 17 and 16. It's amazing how children hold on to tradition, and how we all do, I guess.
Yeah, it makes me wonder what I've forgotten or decided
Yeah.
not to carry on from my family, versus because what I'm seeing right now on the other side of it is like my son's 10, my daughter is almost gonna be 5. Like in 10 years time, these traditions are going to be completely different because they're going to be packed in with whatever they're doing with their friends, and where like I've got a very
Mhm.
small window of time to be like, this is what we do, this is how we celebrate these holidays, before you know I'm suddenly having probably smaller, quieter holidays as well, and they're suddenly so different.
I know.
you
Time,
know
the passage of time.
Passage of time, which is the reason why, just to end this episode on a one argument, this is why the synths, even when they come in a jarring manner, they really get us. Any last thoughts you have about this film before we depart for the holidays?
No, but I wanna return to more movies from my childhood. That's what this made me
Yeah,
decide. I wanna watch more movies that meant a lot to me when I was a kid and see what they mean to me now. And I'm so grateful that someone was making movies about a part of the world and a time in the world that I grew up in, and that really, really resonate with me, and that are funny and entertaining. Like, that's so lucky for me.
and all done in like 90 minutes. It's
I
just
mean,
it's
that
one of
is
those
yes.
movies that
I
like
have a I
it
have one last
proves.
question about that.
Yeah, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I interrupted you. My question is, he did leave a lot out, and do you think that's the better move? Because we
I
talk
mean,
a
I
lot about that.
I've watched the movie with the extended cuts, and it definitely feels like a very different movie. It moves,
Mhm.
not every extended cut. I think that the one he put out in 2022 has like an additional 40 minutes. So I've never seen the full length. But like the shagginess, it gives you the sense of, when you hear the B-sides for a great record. Um, like when whenever Springsteen puts out one of his big box sets around an album, there's always an additional album or 2 that could have gone with the album that was released. Like The River is a great example of this, where, it's a double album because there's a ton of songs that he wanted to feature, but then there's also all these additional songs that he had written for the project. And I think the end result of something that's a little tighter and a little bit more focused with then the option of all the shag is kind of the great
Mm.
middle ground. Because for someone like myself, yes, I will sit down and watch the extended take on Planes, Trains, and Automobiles because I love context and because I just love what these characters do. But and this is a magic of, the way Hughes makes movies, because I felt this with Ferris Bueller as well when I went and saw this in theaters a couple months ago. The tightness that the movie goes, you have no time to, like, pause and, like, think really outside of the story,
Yeah.
and so you're getting all of this information and all of these jokes and all of these plot diversions and just nuggets of character development and character growth, that it's all coming really quickly, and so you can have the experience you were talking about a little bit where you can just, like, watch it and not really think, or you can kinda start to pick up on all these layers to it the more
Mhm.
and more times you've seen it. And I think if the movie was longer, you would be more prone to "Well, why is he doing this? Because of this. Why?" Like,
Yeah.
anytime you watch something that lasts for 2, 3 hours of your time, there is definitely, like, a question in your head of like, "Okay, well, why are you adding all of these things? They better all be necessary to where the story is going." And as we talked about with like one battle after another, it's really hard to do that. Like it's really hard to
Yeah.
say, give me 3 hours and I promise every second of those 3 hours will be worth it.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's the genius of him as a filmmaker. It takes a lot of confidence to cut your story like that, because there are some things that don't totally make sense in this story because of those cuts, but
Yes.
it also makes the movie maybe more watchable and maybe more accessible to people and maybe more fun. It's interesting though, because I think that filmmakers nowadays lean on the opposite end. Like they leave in more than they need to.
Yeah, I think there's a real sense right now that longer, and it's been going on for, I mean, so my son just finished the first Harry Potter. So we watched the first Harry Potter,
The best.
and I was trying to do a movie with him, and then my wife and I were gonna watch a movie afterwards, and she was putting our daughter down, so I was like, "We'll just start this, it's like 90 minutes, we'll be done with it, and then we can watch a movie." No, it's a
Mm-mm.
2.5 hour, 2 hour and 40-minute long movie
Those movies are
for
so
the
long.
they're so long, I'd completely forgotten, and, like, there's a lot of character development, a lot of setting, a lot of this and that that has to be done, but, like, I don't know. I don't necessarily think we needed every little diversion just because it was in the book. I think that we could have done with a little bit more of like a thematic overview of what this means to be Harry Potter. And I say that just because like, we're dealing with the release of the second part of Wicked, which gives us a 4.5, 5 hour long exploration of a 2.5 hour long play. Like, I think we have it in us. It's the same way with records. Like, when I see an album that is 39 minutes, like, that is my sweet spot.
It's
That
so
is when
good.
I know
So
you're
good.
gonna give me enough, and I'm gonna get out, and I'm gonna be able
Yeah.
to do something else. Um, it's really contradictory for me to say this while continuously begging Fish to play longer and longer jams, but, we are made of
Different
contradictions.
things. They're different things. They're totally different things, and I have to say the Bruce Springsteen new album is just it dropped down on my list because I can't re-listen to it in my re-listen of favorite albums this year because it's 5 hours long.
This is
5
the
plus.
challenge.
Yeah,
You either are
so
committed to the 5 hour because it's still I think it's like number 6 or 7 for me
it's
on my
amazing.
list of from the year because I have sat down and listened to it, but I if you can't do it, you can't do it,
I
you
mean, I've
know?
listened to it, like, once, it blew my mind, I put it on, like, number 8, and then once I got there this year, I couldn't like, I'm trying to listen to all my albums in order, and I couldn't do 5.5 hours, so I had to bump it down, but, yeah, I think there's something to be said about economy, and, it takes a lot as an artist to do that. He's not afraid of trimming stuff, and it works well.
Speaking of economy, Perfect Speller says that if they remade this movie, it would have to be in the horror genre considering modern gas prices and flight safety. Um,
So true.
I've always thought like, you know, he would get an Uber and they would never go to the airport together or they'd never
Well,
go to
yeah,
the well, I guess they wouldn't even go to
totally.
the airport.
There'd be
He's not
no
calling
Kevin
tag. Like
Bacon.
there'd be no
No.
Kevin Bacon. They get to Wichita, he calls an Uber again and goes to a Marriott. Like he doesn't have to share a bed with this guy. Like all of these moments in the movie, who
Yeah.
travels by train from Wichita to Chicago, um,
This would
who
be a
travels by
hard movie to
bus.
remake, which I heard they're doing. Did you hear this?
So apparently there was a Will Smith and Kevin Hart remake that was coming as of 2022, and then they were in script writing in 2023. And then apparently Drew Barrymore and Adam Sandler are doing a thematic remake of this movie without it being called Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. I don't really have any interest in either of them.
Neither of those sound good to me.
One of the things about the 80s that makes it so special to revisit from a filmmaking standpoint is that you still have the communication limitations. That means that
Yeah.
people just have to be people together and in these situations together. But the foundations and the structure of modernity have been built. And what Reagan did from a economic standpoint, from a societal standpoint, from a global foreign policy standpoint, still holds true in a lot of cases today, even though a lot of it being ripped apart. We still live in the culture that Reagan created in the 80s, like it or not. And so when you watch movies in that period, you feel a tie to it while also seeing the massive differences in the way that we communicate with people in a way that like when you watch a movie from the 70s, there's so much that has changed
Yeah.
since that period in time, not just communication, but like the culture of the 70s has I think within even 20 years felt um much different from the present. Whereas when I watch something from the 80s, anything from the 80s onward, I still feel like I'm kind of watching a variation of the present world.
80s movies are my absolute favorite. I mean, I love all movies, but 80s are probably my favorite. And I will say, just say, stop remaking perfect movies. Like,
Yeah, just come up with new
they're
ideas.
perfect. So don't remake them. If they're bad, I guess you can try to remake them better, but don't remake a perfect movie. It's not going to be that good. And people are
That
just
would be
going to
an
say it's,
interesting sale. This was a bad movie that we were going to remake and try to make it better. That's an interesting way to do
yeah.
it.
At least there's a purpose for that.
There is. Any last thoughts that you have?
I don't think so. Is this a 5-star movie for you? I have a question about that.
Unquestionably. Yeah, I mean, I've seen this movie so many times. I've thought extensively about this movie. I'm pulling up my all-timer list right now. But yeah, this is unquestionably a 5 star. This is in the 1980s. This is my 19th best movie.
It's a
But in terms
stacked
of
decade.
it's a very stacked decade, but in terms of my all-time favorites, this is my number 26.
Wow, that's pretty high.
It's
I
very
like that.
high.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's right in the range of currently my let's do 26 to 30 is Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, The Big Lebowski, The King of Comedy, Heat, and The Wizard of Oz. So we've got
Mm,
a lot of good stuff in that range.
that's really good. I did give it 4.5 stars.
Four and a half.
Yeah, I just maybe because some of the scoring, sorry, and also maybe just I have an aversion to movies where things go wrong. Just constantly go wrong. This one doesn't bother me as much because they're not making as many stupid decisions. That's what I really can't handle, is when characters just continually make stupid decisions and get into bad situations. That frustrates me and gives me a lot of anxiety. But this has a little bit of the, like, everything just keeps going wrong. And it's just not my favorite type of movie.
I get that. I think
Mhm.
I think that this does enough to showcase they're not necessarily at fault for a lot of these things that have gone wrong. So it's kind of the world. There's an
Yeah.
Odyssey quality to this movie where
Yeah.
it's just the world is pushing them along, rather than they make a decision which was the wrong decision and clearly the wrong decision, and now you're just supposed to go along with it as a viewer.
Exactly. Do you have a favorite John Hughes movie?
This one, without
This is
question.
number 1.
This is number one. I mean, I like Ferris Bueller a lot. I relate less to it as I get older. And I mean, watching that in the theaters, it's just so clear that Ferris is a young conservative, a young Republican who I couldn't really get past his whole view on society, on what he deserves and what he should get, and on consumerism. His sister is the true hero of that movie, and
Yeah.
uh, but at the same time, I enjoyed the hell out of him. There's nothing like watching that movie and thinking back to being junior, senior in high school, May, and being like, okay, can we just like go to the city and watch the Cubs play?
That's my favorite Hughes movie. No doubt.
That's it. That's yours. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's just something so lovable about Ferris, and I think that his whole joie de vivre and this feeling of, you gotta seize the moment and live life to its fullest, and life goes fast and you gotta, like, grab it. I love that, and it hit me so hard when I was young, and I don't know if I've ever really stopped believing that. And it's so beautiful, that movie, like, that scene on the parade in downtown Chicago. Come
Very
on.
good.
Like, come
Very good
on.
scene.
Come on. And just I love the interiors in that movie. I love how he shoots the museum. There's just a million things. I've just, that movie, the jokes in it, I just absolutely love it. I think the characters are incredible. I mean, I take Christmas Vacation out of it because that movie is just so meaningful to me and my family, and I think it's absolutely a perfect film. But emotionally, I like Ferris more. But Christmas Vacation is right up there too, for sure.
I went and saw Ferris in theaters on February 18th this year,
I'm so
and
jealous. I wanna do
this
that.
is my review on Letterbox was that this is a fun argument in favor of dismantling the Department of Education, which it really is. This is really just Ferris being like, why is the New Deal system still in place here? Why is the bureaucratic state bringing down my buzz? And all just so that he can drive a nice car and hang out in downtown Chicago for a day. I totally get it. I get it. But uh, it has the the things that made me love that movie as a young person, I've had to come to reckon with as an older person.
I'm
We'll
still
just say
living
that.
in my youthful beliefs, Brian.
Well, we hope you all are living in the holiday vibes here with this episode, and as we move into the true holiday season, hope that you are starting to get your gift lists in order and can get some relaxation on, watch some football, eat some food, see some people that you love, some people you may not love. Maybe have a good conversation with them, ask them their favorite movie, and see where the conversation goes. That's what we're all about here. We will be back with HF Pod next week. We took this week off to hang out, chill out. We're going to talk about Possum next week on HF Pod and Library Card. We will definitely be back with an episode on the holdovers to celebrate Christmas and probably a couple other things here before the end of the year.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. The Holdovers has become a new annual tradition in my house.
That is our Christmas Eve. We watch that while
So good.
setting up the tree, and it's a just the perfect holiday vibe.
Best movie. I'm excited to talk about that.
Can't wait. Thank you guys. Happy Thanksgiving, and we'll see you guys down the road.
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.